This is the MMA Brief Podcast, recapping the world of mixed martial arts every single week, with your host, Brandon Johansson.
Let's start recapping the fights from this past weekend. First real action was Cody East versus Curtis Blades. TKO, nasty elbows. Cody East was one of the fighters that Dana White found on his YouTube show, Dana White Looking for a Fight. Big, angry, white, heavyweight, I think he's lost both of his UFC fights, but the point is, he got the nastiest head swelling behind the ear I've ever seen. And Curtis Blades ended up going on to win a Performance of the Night's $50,000 bonus off that victory. There was a fight before that, but that was really the best one, obviously, because it won a Performance of the Night. Nate Marquardt ended the fight past prelims with a incredible head kick knockout of Tandon McCrory. Set it up perfectly, and one shot, one kill. That's the deal. Nate also won a $50,000 Performance of the Night bonus for that head kick. Then we moved to the FS2 prelims. This decision, split decision, and another unanimous decision. Last fight ending by submission armbar in the second round. Starting on the FS1 main card, Brandon Moreno from this season of The Ultimate Fighter 24, which has been fantastic. They call it Tournament of Champions. 16 flyweight champions, 125-pound champions from other organizations brought in to The Ultimate Fighter. Winner's going to get a title shot at arguably the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. A lot on the line for these guys every week. They all regard themselves as champions, so every fight's been awesome. 4 for 4 for finishes. It's been great. Brandon Moreno lost early in the tournament and was a late injury replacement for Anthony Pettis' little brother, Sergio Pettis. Louis Smoka went online and started trashing Sergio, saying, he's got a vagina and all this stuff. Brandon Moreno came out with a huge upset. Louis Smoka was ranked 10th in the world at flyweight, and a guy who lost on The Ultimate Fighter came in, guillotine first round. It was a exciting fight, to say the least. Alex Oliveira, Will Brooks in the co-main event didn't go without drama. Cowboy Alex Oliveira missed weight the day before, came in heavy, and Will Brooks had said that he was unprofessional for missing weight. And Will Brooks, a former Bellator MMA champion, came over after his contract disagreement or whatever it was to the UFC. Got his first win against Ross Pearson. So this is his second fight in the UFC. Really just did not look great. He got hurt with a body shot, I believe, in the second round. Might have been late first. And he just was a compromised fighter from there on out. Cowboy Oliveira actually pinned his arm, had him on the ground, and beat the hell out of him. TKO. Got up, did like a chin flick and a crotch chop, and was like, fuck you, dude. Don't call me unprofessional. So it was a pretty shocking loss. If you follow Ill Will Brooks, only has one career defeat, so he got beat down pretty bad. And he left on a stretcher. Seemed like he might have had some sort of serious rib injury. And then the main event, John Dodson versus John LIneker. There's too many Johns in this fight. John Anik was calling the fight. Big John McCarthy, John LIneker versus John Dodson. It's like someone's just got to be called Jonathan at this point. It was a good fight. A lot of people are saying that it was the fight of the year. I don't really see it like that. I thought it had some intense moments when they were actually trading. But John Dodson did a lot of evading. He tried to keep his distance from those big power hooks to the body and to the head of John LIneker. I personally thought that LIneker won, which he did by split decision. And, some people said Dodson should have won. I felt that he didn't. He landed some significant strikes, but it didn't seem to faze LIneker at all, and LIneker just kept pressing forward and pressing forward. So I thought the rightful winner was awarded. Definitely not the fight of the year. Carlos Condit, Robbie Lawler has to be the fight of the year. I don't care what happens from here to January. That fight was incredible. And of course, this week we've got UFC 204, huge card in Manchester, England. newly crowned champion Michael Bisping, of course, coming off of his upset of Luke Rockhold, who once Rockhold beat Weidman, Weidman had beat Anderson Silva, the greatest of all time. Once Weidman lost, it was like, wow, Rockhold is going to be champion for a long time if he just did that to Weidman. Replacement fight, Bisping steps up on like less than 2 weeks' notice, and Rockhold just was too confident. Had his hands down, and Bisping clipped him one time in the first round, followed up, knocked him the fuck out. He's the new champion. So he gets his way. He's getting a contender who is ranked outside the top 10. There's a lot of other middleweights who deserve this title shot, but he's getting a chance at revenge. Dan Henderson, obviously famous, one of the best one-punch KOs of all time at UFC 100, knocking Michael Bisping the fuck out, and then blasting his unconscious body with a diving elbow shot that just, will be remembered forever in MMA. So Bisping's having a chance now to get that bad taste out of his mouth. He's the champion, and now he has a chance to get his first title defense against a guy who is famous for knocking him out. So it's going to be an interesting fight. Dan Henderson's my all-time favorite. Every time he has ups and downs, it seems like he's down and out. Now, it just seems like the MMA gods have gifted this title shot, because it doesn't make sense ranking-wise at all. There's a lot more deserving people than Dan Henderson, but the fact that they have history, the fact that people want to see that, the champion wants to fight. Dan Henderson obviously wants the chance to be the champion of UFC, one of the only places he hasn't been champion. Champion of Strikeforce, multi-champion of Pride Fighting Championship. So this is the last big accomplishment for Dan Henderson. So it seems perfect for everybody. There is really going to be no loser, except for the person who's probably going to get knocked out. But there's no loser with the fans, because Bisping's going to get his chance. Can he rewrite history? Can he show that first fight doesn't mean shit? He's the champion now, so that doesn't mean anything anymore. Or can Dan Henderson wind back the clock, take what's rightfully his, the title, and retire, walk out, go out on top like nobody ever does? John Elway, maybe Peyton Manning, but this is different sports. Combat sports, they always stick around way too late. And that's what I thought of Dan Henderson. He stuck around too late. Supposed to fight John Bones Jones for the 205 title after stringing together some pretty impressive wins in Strikeforce, coming over to UFC, having the fight of the year with Mauricio Shogun Rua, and he was supposed to be the next challenger in line. Basically, Dan Henderson's knee went out less than 2 weeks before the fight. They canceled the whole pay-per-view, which they've never done before, never done since. So it was a pretty big deal. Ever since he got injured and they canceled the pay-per-view, Dan Henderson's been on a roller coaster of wins and losses. Of course, he lost a split decision to Lyoto Machida, then he lost a split decision to Rashad Evans, then he got knocked out for the first time in his career by Vitor Belfort. He got choked unconscious by Daniel Cormier in a pool of his own blood. He got TKO'd by Gegard Mousasi, who's also fighting on this 204 card. But anyway, he had suffered some losses back-to-back, and it just didn't seem like he would ever get to this title shot. But here he is, somehow, after his last fight against Hector Lombard, who had never been knocked unconscious. Dan Henderson and him had a crazy back-and-forth war, just like every Dan Henderson fight. And he ended up getting the win by head kick and mostly by reverse elbow, which I've never seen anyone do. It just is a testament to how crazy his power is. He just touches you and you go out, and that's what makes this fight interesting. Sure, Dan Henderson's not like most fighters in 2016. He's kind of stiff, he's kind of predictable, but if he touches you one time, you're going to sleep. And we all remember Bisping was like fucking knocked out for like 10 minutes. I mean, they had a problem waking him up. I thought he was fucking dead. Like, the way he hits people, he puts you to fucking sleep. Out. Not this TKO bullshit. He knock you into next Tuesday. So that's what makes this fight so exciting. UFC 204. And like I said before, one of the guys who knocked out Dan Henderson, actually not once but twice, Vitor Belfort, both by head kick. He also knocked out Bisping by head kick. But he hasn't looked great as of late. His last loss was to Jacare Souza. Jacare mounted him and just looked for the submission, couldn't get the submission, so he decided he's just going to beat the fuck out of him. Kind of like, schoolyard type of stuff. Got the mount and just beat him until the ref stopped it. Similar to the way Chris Weidman had recently defeated Vitor Belfort. So can Vitor recover? He's fighting a really tough guy, Gegard Mousasi. It's going to be an interesting fight. That's the co-main event this weekend. A couple other really good fights this weekend, and of course, next weekend you got BJ Penn, Ricardo Lamas in Manila, and that should hopefully not be too depressing. Like, I don't really want to see Dan Henderson get knocked out and then see BJ Penn get beat up back-to-back weeks. You know what I mean? Like, let these legends... I don't know. I don't want to say easy fight. I don't like the BJ Penn versus Ricardo Lamas. It doesn't make any sense to me. Ricardo's dangerous, young, really well-rounded. Like, when was the last time BJ Penn won a fight? I don't know. It's way too long ago. I mean, he's been beaten down by Rory. He's been beaten down by Nick Diaz. He's been beaten down by Frankie Edgar, was the last person. And he actually stopped him, which a lot of guys don't. Nick Diaz beat him up. Rory McDonald beat the fuck out of him. But nobody actually stopped him. And Frankie just stopped him. Now he decides he's going to train at Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn's gym in New Mexico. It's a good idea because it's only going to make him better, but I just don't like the matchup of Ricardo Lamas. Like, why not someone not even ranked? You know, that's where BJ Penn is. He's not even ranked. He's just a name. Why put him, I guess because he can sell tickets maybe, but I worry because I've been seeing him get beat up too much. So I hope he has success against Ricardo Lamas, but I don't really like his chances. So on UFC 204, after, of course, the co-main event being Vitor Belfort, Gegard Mousasi, you got a good pivotal matchup in 205, Jimmy Manuwa versus Ovince St. Preux. Both guys with a lot of power, both guys with a lot of potential. That should be a pretty interesting fight, hopefully. Stefan Struve making his return against some guy I've never heard of. I'm guessing it's his debut. Daniel, I don't even want to try to pronounce the last name. But there's some other interesting fights on there. Yuri Alcantara versus Brad Pickett. Watching Brad Pickett fight is always fun. You also got Rob Font. And then Albert Tumanov making his return ever since losing. Everybody thought he was the hottest striker in MMA. And he ended up getting grapple fucked by Gunnar Nelson. So hopefully he can bounce back and show you that he's actually dangerous at 170. But other than that, I'm tuning in for those top two fights, both middleweight fights, Vitor versus Gegard Mousasi, and Bisping fighting Henderson for the belt. Those are the real ticket sellers. Those are the fucking needle movers right there. And everything else is just icing on the cake. 205. UFC 205 is just huge, man. All these fights get announced this week. Ridiculous amount of fights. And outside the UFC, Bellator 163, McGarry versus Phil Davis, which is going to be really good. Liam McGarry, if you haven't seen him fight, really good fighter. I'd like to see how I don't want to say against John Jones, but he's lengthy and he's dominant at 205. Just submitted Tito Ortiz, and of course, we know Phil Davis from his UFC days. Has submission win over Alexander Gustafsson, decision win against Lyoto Machida. He's beat some really good guys. Now he's in Bellator. He's getting his world title shot, or Bellator championship belt shot, I should say, because we all know where the real world champions are in the UFC. But that fight's interesting to me. Okay, November 5th, Rafael Dos Anjos is making his return ever since losing his belt to Eddie Alvarez, which I'll get to in a second, is fighting Tony El Cucuy Ferguson, which is going to be an awesome fight. I've never seen Tony Ferguson in a boring fight, and Rafael Dos Anjos is going to look to get in there, impose his will, get on the right track so he can get his title back. He got clipped with a shot earlier on in the first round against Alvarez, and Alvarez just standing TKO, got him up against the cage, just delivered uppercuts and hooks and big shots until the referee jumped in to stop it. But Dos Anjos is tough, and he's going to want to prove that that was a fluke, and he can string a couple good wins together. He's right back in the title picture. He beat a guy like Tony Ferguson, and that's even better. For Tony Ferguson, if you beat a guy like Rafael dos Anjos, who's just the champion, how do you not get a title shot? The guy's been on a crazy streak. I think he's won 8 in a row. Oh, I just love watching him fight. His fighting style is so unpredictable. It's like borderline reckless, and he just always seems to win. His last fight was a test for him. Guy fighting on short notice I'd never heard of, and the guy almost shocked the world. But Tony Ferguson was too fucking tough for that. You know, he got rocked 2 or 3 times in that fight where it was almost like, holy fuck, Tony Ferguson is done. And he came back and he ended up getting his patented choke and beating the guy. He's got tons of heart. He's super well-rounded, tough as nails. So UFC 205, November 12th, in Madison Square Garden. UFC making their long-awaited return to the Garden State. Finally, MMA was legalized in New York, the last holdout. Out of all the states, MMA was legal in all the states, and New York finally got with the times. So they just put together this ridiculous card. Former title challenger Liz Carmouche, of course, Rousey's first fight in the UFC. She's fighting on the very first fight. Thiago Alves versus Jim Miller. Tim Bosch versus Rafael Natal. Rashad Evans versus Tim Kennedy. Frankie Edgar versus Jeremy Little Heathen Stevens. Rocky Pennington fighting former champion Misha Tate. Michael Johnson coming off an impressive one-punch knockout of Dustin Poirier is going against Khabib Nurmagomedov, who a lot of people think is the rightful number 1 contender at 155. Donald Cerrone fighting Calvin Gastelum. Gastelum looked great in his last fight against Johnny Hendricks. Yoel Romero versus former champion Chris Weidman, of course a New York native, so he's going to be excited to fight in front of his family and friends. Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz for the strawweight title. You got 2 undefeated fighters at 115, women's fight. That's going to be a real good fight. Then you got Tyron Woodley defending his belt for the first time since knocking out ruthless Robbie Lawler against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, which is going to be incredible. You know, Wonderboy Thompson has looked pretty much unstoppable since the Jake Ellenberger fight. Jake stunned him with a punch, and you started to see maybe a little bit of weakness in his armor, and maybe Tyron's going to find that same chink. But he's fought really tough guys since then. Of course, he went on to beat Jake Ellenberger by spinning back kick, destroyed his ass, and then he beat Johnny Hendricks by spinning back kick, and then he just beat Roy McDonald by decision. Wasn't even close. So that's the co-main event, the welterweight title on the line. And Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor for the 155-pound lightweight title. That's going to be a good fight. That's 3 title fights on there, and it's just a ton of good, basically number 1 contender fights. You got the Frankie Edgar, Jeremy Stevens, that could potentially be, set someone up for the title shot. Rocky Pennington versus Misha Tate, I think the winner of that sees himself very relevant in the 135-pound weight class. Yoel Romero versus Chris Weidman. There's also Rockhold versus Jacare coming up, so I feel like the most impressive winner out of that is probably going to fight Bisping, or, if Dan Henderson doesn't retire, Henderson. Cowboy Cerrone, who was supposed to originally fight Robbie Lawler on this card. Robbie obviously dealing with some sort of negative reactions to being knocked out, and he wants to take a little bit more time off. Doesn't want to hop right back in there, so this fight's going to be insane. This weekend's going to be insane. If you haven't been watching The Ultimate Fighter, Wednesdays, Fox Sports 1, 10 o'clock, every fight's been really good. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.